Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Woodburn Accountants and Advisors China webinar series on tapping into China's trade opportunity through traditional retail and e-trade. You have joined us for day 4, our last day, part 4, where we will be looking at warehousing options in China. Questions that have popped up from clients of mine, particularly during the pre-investment stage of their China development, have been things like, do I have to leave inventory on the ground? Would it be more beneficial for me to leave inventory on the ground? If I do leave inventory on the ground, where should I keep it? What options do I have? I've heard of bonded zones, non-bonded zones, bonded logistics parks. I've heard of all these types of varieties of places, and I've also heard of people having just simply bad warehousing experiences. So I'm very honored today, particularly on a public holiday in China, today's Dragon Boat Festival, to have Alan Cho with us from Mentor Media, which is a company owned by a Landers Group, to talk about the warehousing options in China and to go into depth about the benefits, the disadvantages there are with the options that exist. So let's get cracking. A little bit of technical slides, if you don't mind. Again, I'm seeing new faces. We've had great resonance throughout this webinar series, but I feel like people have been picking and choosing which webinars to join that pertain to them. If you've missed certain webinars and you kind of want to backtrack because each of them has led on to the other, then the 3 last webinars are already up on our YouTube channel. And you can go and look at those. But what I love about these webinars is when people get interactive with us. And in the last 3 sessions, we've had amazing questions and comments come up during the Q&A where I think everybody was able to expand on their knowledge base outside of just the PowerPoint presentation. So we want to start off with this interaction. I want to know who you are. Alan wants to know who you are. Yesterday, a few people already interacted and told us they were newbies in startups. Let me tell you how I define people in China. I usually define them by newbies. These are generally individuals who have found an opportunity in China. They're evaluating that opportunity, or they're searching for an opportunity, and they're on these webinars to gain education on how they can do things right, how they can set up their business models correctly, and ultimately how they can protect themselves and their brand. Then there's the startups in China, and these are usually companies that have been established for a period of 1 to 3 years in China and have always been focusing their core attention on either sales, merchandising, production, really the core functions of the organization and the supply chain, versus looking at how to optimize structures beneficially, how to think about administration, compliance, protection, organization. So that's why they're on here to really start optimizing that structure so that they can eventually focus on growth. And then I've got the experienced China hands, who I love to have. That's for me my fan base, because these are people that have been on for numerous years, looking and listening into the webinars, but they're individuals who've been in China for 15, 20 years, like myself. And even like myself, we're always furthering our education on things in China because regulations change very frequently. So in order to get new, fresh ideas, to understand what are the latest updates and how it would impact one's business, I do know that a lot of people join on. So do let me know. Do let Alan know. Type it in really quickly in the chat box. Newbie, startup, experienced China hand. For those of you that have already interacted with us, you don't have to, but for those of you that haven't, please do. I see some of you are shy. Nobody's typing in. Please do interact and let us know who you are. It always gives us a sense of who's in the audience. How these webinars work is I try to teach and educate. Alan is also going to be teaching and educating today. Use the next, I'm not going to say 60 minutes anymore because we're definitely going to run over, but use the next 70, 80 minutes of your time as your valuable spend. Write as many questions as you have in the question section. Alan and I are not going anywhere until all those questions have been answered. Okay? If you've got comments, questions, place them in. Please try to be as clear as possible. Take your time to write those questions, because otherwise it's taking time away from dissecting what you're trying to ask us. So try to be detailed, not too detailed, but detailed enough that we get the question, and then we'll answer them. All right, so use this as your valuable spend. I really want to emphasize that. It's lovely. I think some people have been messaging in, Alan, just so you know. Martin is in between a newbie and a startup. Clive is a startup. Kim is an oldie. Timothy is a newbie. Robin is a rusty experience China hand. Love that. So it's a real mixture today. All right, I love this. It's fantastic. Just some technical things that I want to mention. Yesterday, it was absolutely my fault. I had tremendous internet difficulties. Today, I don't seem to be having a problem. Hopefully today, everything will run very smoothly. If something happens from my side, please don't leave. Within a few moments, I will be coming back on and we will be finishing this webinar. If something happens on Alan's side, again, I'm on WeChat with him and we're gonna figure out the technical side. I unfortunately can't help each of you as I'm speaking or presenting or controlling the system. I can't help you from your side. If you do have a technical issue, try and search on GoToWebinar, or alternatively, please do listen to the recording at the end of today. I know it's frustrating. I apologize for that, but that's sort of the technical side of things that we kind of have to deal with these online webinars and seminars. A little bit about myself. So I'm the moderator for today's session. So very shortly, I'll stop talking. Who am I? My name is Christina Kohler-Coluccia. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. I have been 16 years in the Chinese market, based out of Shanghai, and I've been solely dealing with the corporate services sector and compliance sector in China. My focus has been 100% on inbound investors, so foreign investors looking to enter the Chinese market, and I've helped over 500 companies with their pre-investment advisory, helping them to create business models that are strategic for them, both in the short and the long term, implementing those structures in a phased approach, and then focusing on growth and acceleration of growth in the Chinese market. And I'm a creator of the China Roadmap Method, which is a method that I created in January 2020, where I'm trying to really put people on the right path from the get-go into China, providing bullet point lists of action plans that have to be taken. If you're interested about the China Roadmap Method, I've got a webinar on this coming up in July 7th. That's the next webinar I'll be holding. I can't add the link into the chat box, apologies. But if you are interested, you'll get a copy of the slides. You can register, or I can send you an email with the registration link. Not an issue. But definitely you're free to sign up for that. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm gonna unmute Alan. Or Alan, you'll have to click the red mic button. There we go.
Okay. Hi, thank you, Christina. So hi, everyone.
My pleasure.
This is Alan here. Yeah. So just to give you guys a little bit introduction of myself. So my name is Alan. I have been working with Mental Media, wholly owned subsidiaries of Atlantis Group since 2016. My primarily focus is on to providing a lot of end-to-end supply chain solutions to a lot of my international clients. And before joining Mentor, I have been working previous in different industry sectors, in the fashion industries, in the medical space, and focusing on different operation roles and also the key account management. Okay, so the next slide. So next slide is just purely explaining who we are. As we're Atlantis, and we're mainly focusing on providing our clients with the supply chain solutions and print and packaging space. As you can see in the credentials, we're a public company listed in Stockholm, and also Swedish companies. And if we go to the next slide, so here you can see where we present. So we have offices around the world, and also including the operational sites. Okay, so next slide. So today I'm going to talk about the the fundamental of the warehousing options. So that's including the non-bonded warehouse and also the free trade facility bonded warehouse. And just to give you guys a quick background of where we are present in China. So this is just a quick view of our warehousing network in China. We have a total of 11 sites. I'm not going to go into detail. So today's session is going to be purely educational based for everyone to understand more about how to utilize both different options in terms of warehousings, and whether you're going to invest in the China market, and how should you select your service partner more carefully, and also in the business sense to select accurately, and how it could benefit from your business that you're going to invest in China. So, and the next slide is going just a quick intro about the supply chain solutions that we have been provided to our international clients. So this is a service scope that we do, and also today's sessions we're going to talk about the warehousing options. And many people of you may know, so warehousing, it's a very fundamental part that if you want to do business that's within the supply chain pace, and also if you're a business that into any tradings in China or any import export in and out from China or into China. And just give you a quick, many of you who does not know us, so Atlantis Group and Mental Media was, as I mentioned previously, a Swedish-owned company, and with operational sites across the world. And we basically provide a lot of supply chain end-to-end to our clients to meet their requirements. And now we're going to go to the warehousing options. So I'm going to go to the topic that we are going to discuss today. So just to give you the few headlines on the warehousing options. So today, the warehousing options will including the bonded and non-bonded warehouse. So we'll be talking about some of the questions that people frequently ask. So what is a bonded and non-bonded warehouse? And secondly, what you can do and cannot do in the bonded and non-bonded facility, and what should you look for from your warehousing providers? And some of the features that I'm going to cover for you guys today on the bonded and non-bonded warehouse, including some of the licensing requirements and the optimizations of shipping routes for the two warehouses. And at last, just the conclusion, and hand it over to Christina and some Q&A with you guys. And yeah, hope you guys can enjoy, and let's begin. So moving on to the next slide. So we're going to talk about what is a China bonded warehouse. So the definition of a bonded warehouse, many people, if you may know or may not know, so a bonded warehouse is also called a low tax or even a tariff-free zone, a tax protected zone. So we call it as a bonded warehouse. And the bonded warehouse is actually set up by the China customs, including the government, local governments, to register within the approval, and also subject to customs supervision and management, that we can store the goods under a very competitive rate. So there are the bonded facilities that you can store your goods, and basically you can get a lot of free advantages that is given by the China government and the China customs. And also it's the free trade facilities, the bonded warehouse is also an economic zone that is established with the approval of the China State Council and under special customs supervisions. So basically, having said that, it's a bonded facilities, and it can be monitored by the China Customs 24 hours. And it's also, the bonded warehouse is also nowadays one of the most favorable options for import-export businesses, that whenever you guys wanted to do business in China, involving trading, buy, sell, so this is the most favorable options that many people would go for. So the next slide. So what can you do in a bonded warehouse? So some of the criteria that you can do, including the functions of import-export processing. So the bonded warehouse is usually located close to a deep sea port or any of the port in China areas and or in other cities in China, that it's purely for import-export processing. And the reason that the bonded warehouse is usually located over there is because if you have a facility, if you have a bonded facilities that's located close to the port, it gives you a greater lead time benefit to distribute your shipments anywhere else to overseas, globally, or even to distribute locally to the cities that's close to the port and regional fulfillment purposes. And also, the bonded warehouse can give you the options of doing international trades or intermediary trade. And also, bonded warehouse can provide a lot of e-commerce purposes, the display of bonded products. So some of you may familiar with e-commerce business models. Is usually located in the bonded facilities, and usually it could be viewed as a display of products coming from overseas to the bonded warehouse in China, and to put as a display purposes or to do a fulfillment purposes to ship to China consumer direct. And also, bonded warehouse, the most fundamental requirements and the most fundamental services that provide in bonded warehouse is the warehousing options. So the warehousing, many people will utilize it upon the warehouse to do a lot of warehousing options to actually to store the goods in the bonded facility so that the suppliers in China can get the tax rebate. And also in the bonded warehouse, you can do a lot of value-added services in-house, so which is the light kitting assemblies, even to do a lot of value-added services compared to what you're going to do from the origin places. So the main reason of doing this is because a lot of people are utilizing the China bonded warehouse to do the services is to lower the cost compared to what they're doing in the origin origin warehouse. For example, if you do a kitting of value-add services in overseas destination or in your origin destination, origin places, for example, in US or in other countries, the cost in comparison with China, there's a huge gap in our past experience that we viewed. So a lot of people would choose to utilize a bonded warehouse to fulfill the needs, so to lower the cost, to optimize the cost options to rather do it in the bonded facilities. Also, more importantly, many people are utilizing the bonded warehouse is to so the suppliers they're also they're having a frustration that, oh, my supplier cannot get the tax rebate. How do my suppliers get the tax rebate? So the bonded warehouse gives you the options of doing the tax rebate in advance for all your suppliers that are located in China, compared to your traditional trading. If you are doing a direct ship from China to overseas, then the tax rebate can only be get once the shipment is physically arrived in the overseas destinations. Compared to a bonded facilities, if you ship from your manufacturing location in China straight to the bonded warehouse, the tax rebate can be get in advance prior to the shipments that physically leave the ship and go into sale to the destinations. So it's one of the benefits, and most importantly, also bonded warehouse can provide buy sell of finished goods. You can do a lot of trading activities over there inside the facilities. And moving on, so what can't you do in the bonded facilities? So the bonded facility is monitored by the China Customs, very strict. The reason being is it gives a lot of tax benefit for the business, for business owners, for any investors, and also it gives a lot of open access to do tradings and to do warehousing, also to do overseas import-export fulfillments within their area. And having said that, many manufacturing activities is not allowed. This is because bonded facilities, it's purely meant for finishing goods. So whatever you having the manufacturing activities, it's usually done in the domestic area in China. And once it's finished goods, it will be shipped to the free trade facility, also called the bonded warehouse, to get the tax rebate and to do the exportations, or even from overseas destinations to do any importations from the bonded facilities. The reason also manufacturing activities is not allowed is because China government are trying to restrict the manufacturing facilities that is close to the port area. Is because just the safety concerns, and also in the past there are records that manufacturing activities in the free trade zones having serious cases of explosions or any illegal activities over there. So the China government trying to avoid that happens again. So that's why the manufacturing activities are not allowed in the bonded facilities. Those activities are usually done outside the bonded facilities or the bonded areas. And also you cannot do, which is going to be handling, as I mentioned, handling or storing any illegal products. So just to let you guys know, we cannot try not to do any illegal product handling inside the facilities. Make sure you don't store any weapons, illegal drugs, or in any toxic items in there. So this is the fundamentals that we're trying to avoid in the bonded warehouse. And also some of the what you cannot do in the bonded warehouse, some of the dangerous items or any chemical explosive related products are forbidden inside the bonded facilities. Some of the dangerous goods are categorized as different tier levels. So there are certain dangerous goods that you can operate if you get any special approval by their local China customs, depending on what kind of operations that you wanted to deal with for your dangerous goods inside that free trade areas. And it may or may not get approved. So this is subject to the operational scale that you're doing inside the bonded facilities, and subject to your approval, subject to the approval from the China customs. So, okay, so go to the next page. Yep. So what should you look for your warehouse provider? So many of you may wonder, so if I wanted to do a business in China and I really need a bonded warehouse, so what should I look for, and what are the criteria that I need to consider before I made the final decisions to select this service provider? So there are some of the criteria that I listed in the presentation slides that are very critical when you are looking for a warehouse providers in the bonded areas. So the bonded area location in China. So the first thing is location. Locations meaning there are so many bonded facilities located in Greater China, and they wanted to know there are different regulations being set by local free trade customs within the bonded areas. So different bonded facilities will have different regulations, but all in all, most of the common regulations are all the same that every bonded facilities need to follow, and the China customs will have the same the basic regulations that's set over there. But there are certain maybe special requirements that can be allowed to do there in the bonded facilities or cannot, or any specific requirement from their local customs over there, then that some of the entities who register over there may need to apply in additionally or follow additionally. And the second point is, so as I mentioned, I'll go back to the first one, the locations. Some geographically are located. Some of the ports are opened. For example, China, taking Shanghai as example. Shanghai, we have the first established port in Ningbo area. So this is the first established port since 19th centuries. And the latest free trade port that I know is in Yangsan area. So Yangsan is the latest free trade facilities developed and supported by the China government. And this is to promote the import and export trading and to make it as the second largest hub compared to the Singapore and other overseas countries as a free port options. And so some of the the warehouse provider that you need to take into considerations are the geographically locations and what are the capabilities within that areas. Some of the things that can do and cannot do. So those are the criteria that you have to first understand from your warehouse provider. And secondly is the warehousing space. you have to, besides looking at them location scale, you have to look at what are the space requirements that can they meet your business requirements in terms of space capabilities. Do they have the required space that you need in order to engage with your collaboration project or your businesses to do whether importation or exportations within that area or any other services that need to engage. The third one is the warehouse specifications. Besides knowing the space, you have to take a deep look at what are the facilities that they have inside the free trade zones, and also the equipments, what they have, including some of the businesses that you wanted to do with them. If your businesses are in the large volumes and require automations, do they have the capabilities in terms of automations in-house? Do they have any other equipments that the basic fundamental equipment such as forklift, kitting lines, loading bays, racking structures, security and safety, and also depending on what type of products that you want them to handle for you, do they have the necessity requirements in terms of temperature control? If you're doing food and beverages or even raw material foods, do they have the temperature control inside the facility to handle your products or your projects that you're doing with them? Number 4 is going to be the license to operate. So besides your warehouse providers can operate your products, what are the licenses they need to operate to handle your products? So in China regulations, there are certain warehousing providers, they may require additional license to operate under the specific product categories. For example, food. You need to get FDA licenses approved in China in order to operate food, drugs, medicines, food and beverages. And for example, for any alcohols or any products that involve alcohols percentage, then you need to have a special alcohol licenses, trade licenses for alcohol to handle. Also, if you have any licenses that it's involving the automotive, you may have to acquire GSP standard. Also, for the electronic industry, you have to provide the 3C certificate, which is the China compulsory certificate, to ensure that the products that you're handling are in the safety requirements and it's been approved by the legal authorities. So this is something that if you're looking to select your warehousing providers, so license to operate, this is one of the most important things that you need to ask them, and you need to get to know a bit more familiar with them, so that they have the necessary requirements to handle your products within the legal pace. And also, if your projects that you're going to collaborating with them, do they have the capability to support your business in a massive scale? If your projects are going to handle with them, it's going to be involved as China domestically, not just within one city. Then you have to find out with your warehouse provider, do they have any other satellite site to support your businesses rather than just one simple region? Because China is so big and it covers around all the other cities with miles distance. Then you have to understand, besides, if you have any projects that collaborating with them, for example, in Shanghai, do they have other satellite sites to support your business in other cities in China, like Shenzhen or in Beijing or in Sichuan province or in other provinces? And the last one is capabilities. So the capability in this criteria would have including the warehousing capability in terms of system. So the most fundamental requirements as a warehouse provider, what are the system capabilities they have? Do they have the automation systems, the warehousing systems to track your inventory, to give you the live inventory status, or to give you a tracking report or a market report that you required from the warehouse provider to see and view your live inventory, or also to manage your orders in and out, and also to track your orders when it comes to the fulfillment pace. And also, when it comes to the capabilities, it may be good to ask your warehousing provider that you wanted to select, or your potential warehouse provider in your target list, do you have any successful case studies that you can share with me from your existing operation in similar to what you're going to collaborate with me. So some of the critical case studies you may want them to share with you so that you get familiar with, and also the confidence level that they can provide, that they can support your project together. And also I would recommend a physical warehousing tool. I know currently due to the COVID-19 situations, I know certain the overseas travels are still forbidden. And if you do have a warehouse, or if you do have a local team in China, make sure you utilize the engagement of the local team in China to engage a warehouse visit. For if you have a tentative warehouse provider that you select, then you are about to partner with them, or before you make a decision, make sure you have a physical warehouse tour with them to see the overview of where they're residing exactly and what are the exact capabilities or they're handling in the existing operation case they're doing in-house. The last point for the capability is going to be the freight resources. So we have to make sure that they do have sufficient freight resources to support your project in terms, whether if it's a domestic fulfillment in China or an overseas distributions, end-to-end fulfillment, freight fulfillments for 5 different options of the transportation mode, like air freight, sea freight, or even rail, China to Europe rail, or even the land for the domestic deliveries. So if we go to the next slide.
Alan, do you mind if I just interrupt you?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
I just, because I'm always worried about going back to slides during the Q&A. I just wanted to highlight something to everybody. This is your interview question list that has been very nicely given by Alan when you want to interview logistics providers. This is an absolutely amazing bullet point list. There are only 2 points that I wanted to ask you, Alan. So I had a client, it was the year of the expo, where they were entering the Chinese market, and they actually did exactly what you've outlined here. I think they met with maybe 5 or 6 different logistics providers. They finally settled on one. And they have a product that needs to be in a temperature controlled facility. So that was very vital for them. So they also did site visits to visit the warehousing and all of that. However, when the first shipment arrived, the client didn't do a check because they assumed everything was A-okay. And when it came down to actually releasing the goods into domestic China, they found out that 80% of the product had been broken because the provider did not have enough warehousing space and subcontracted to another provider who didn't have the temperature control system, and then product broke. Now, I know it's a really difficult question for you to answer, because, I mean, my question is, how do you stop that from happening? Because you're saying, you know, regarding warehousing space, do they meet your requirement? Well, in the interview stage, they did. But when it came to the actual delivery, they didn't, and they subcontracted without telling the client, and then wasn't in a temperature controlled warehousing, and then product broke. So how could you get around that? How could you make sure that they do what they are selling to you that they're going to do?
So this is actually depends on the subcontractor in the initial, whether it's a visiting warehouse tour in the beginning, they need to understand that they have seen there's existence of the temperature control room, and during the contract signing phase, they have to ensure that this is within the scope, because there's some in some of our previous cases, we do happen, whereas within the contract signing stage, they did not specifically mention that the client required a temperature control rooms.
Okay.
It's purely just a general warehousing space for all the storaging. So this is something that besides physically to visit the warehouse, also to get to know there are no third party, there are no for example, if you're engaging a warehouse provider, you have to make sure that they do not outsource anything to support your project. For example, if you are engaging this as a warehouse provider, you have to make sure that they don't outsource. If you want a temperature control room, you have to make sure that they do have a physical temperature control room, which is owned by them or actually rented by them, not to outsource to
Right.
somebody else to do the
And
business.
then probably
Otherwise,
just make sure in the contract that it states that they're not allowed to subcontract.
yeah, they're not allowed, because this is very crucial in terms of liabilities. So in the event if there's anything happened on the legal pace, if you wanted to do any legal actions, taking any legal actions, they could further argue that they have put all the responsibility to any subcontractor that they outsource. So it is very critical that you have to make sure the warehouse provider that's in your target list, you have to make sure that they don't outsource anything to any third party to support your project. You have to make sure that they do have the physical capabilities to support this from their team locally.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other question that I had, which I thought was a really interesting point regarding the licenses to operate. How do you verify that? How do you verify that they can handle food and beverage items? Is it in their business license, or do they have a separate license?
So sometimes, usually the China business license are all in Chinese. So it would be good if you can get a copy of their corporate license, corporate register license, which the corporate license will involve a lot of scope inside that. This license, when they set up the company, they can operate certain kind of products inside the scope. So you have to make sure that you get a copy of their business license. Of course, it's going to be in Chinese, but you have to make sure that they give you a translation of the English version of their service, of their company license copy, so that you can understand.
But is there any additional license that you would need to apply for to handle food and beverage items or handle automotive goods, or is it just within the business scope?
So the business scope in the license, when you set up a warehousing provider, where you set up an entity that is involving the warehousing solution provider, usually the business license scope include a wide range of the products that you can handle inside your facility, but that does not include, sometimes it does not include the scope that you can do something additionally extreme compared to the scope that you can handle in the license. For example, if you're handling food and beverages, you can handle the basic fulfillment, the warehousing for the food and beverages, but the license does not specify that you can handle any buy sell, any trading, or any retailers or wholesales within your license scope. You have to ask the warehouse provider. You have to ask them specifically. For example, I saw your license scope has food and beverages. Have you applied any other additional license to support if my projects want you to do any buy sell involved, any other services I want you to do additionally within that product? Can you handle, or do you have any additional license that you can prove that you can handle?
Okay.
Project. Okay. So in my past experience, we handled a lot of food and beverages. So according to the China regulations, if you wanted to handle food and beverages within the warehouse provider, not just the warehousing, not just the company business license scope needs to be included, but also you have to apply the so-called FTZ license, which is Food Drug Association license, to handle specifically for food and beverage transportations, fulfillment, in-house value-add services. So this is an additional requirement by the China government. And in other case studies, for example, in the medical pace, if you want to handle medicines, drugs, then you have to apply also the FTZ licenses, or even you have the warehousing provider need to have the basic GSP, which is the good supply, which is the basic supply chain practices for handling medical products.
Understood. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. If anybody's got any other questions, this is an amazing slide. I'm telling you, you should definitely utilize this. So sorry to interrupt you, Alan. I'll let you go on.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so this slide will be showing you the features of the bonded warehouse, as I mentioned in my previous slides. The first one is going to be the tax rebate. So this is a great benefit for if your manufacturer are residing in China. If you have a China manufacturing and you wanted to export your products out to overseas, whether it's delivered to your customers or delivered to your third-party warehouses, then it's a good option to utilize the bonded warehouse because the bonded warehouse once receive the goods from your manufacturer in China, your manufacturer can immediately get the tax rebate in advance before the physical goods are entered into the bonded facilities. So this is for the suppliers can enjoy zero duty benefit. And also secondly, it's a VAS, which is the value add service activities. In the bonded facilities, we can also call them an overseas warehouse, just like Singapore or just like US, just like Japan warehouse. A lot of activities that can be done in the bonded warehouse compared to it cannot be done in the non-bonded warehouse. So I will highlight one which is inside this slide, which is the price masking. So many of you may not know what price masking is. So in your manufacturer facilities, it is illegal to do any price masking, is because they can only, when they are going to export their products, they can only declare to the China customs it's under the manufacturing prices. They cannot do any retail activities of the price masking or any price labelings of the retail pricing. Otherwise, because the documents will be a mismatch, and this will be an illegal act if you want to export your product out from your manufacturer. And whereas a bonded facility is giving the benefit of the suppliers to import, to deliver the products inside the facility to get the tax rebate in advance. Also from the bonded facility scale, the team in the bonded facilities can do the price masking because the goods are already considered overseas. And compared to the price masking, if you do the price masking, the labeling in-house in the China bonded facilities, the price is very low. It may be a couple cents, but compared to if you wanted to do the price masking, the retail labelings in the overseas destinations, the price could be triple. The price can be even 10 times higher than what you do compared to because of the labor cost differences compared to China and overseas destinations. And also the bonded facilities gives a great advantage of you to do kittings and assemblies. For the light kitting assemblies, you can do kitting of the retail boxings and also to do repackings and assemblies of the semi-finished goods to a finished good. And also the bonded warehouse give you the advantage of do the consolidation services from multiple suppliers, manufacturers residing in China in different cities to do all the consolidation work and to deliver to the bonded facilities. And from there, we can do all the value-add services over there and distribute to overseas destinations according to what project requires. Yeah. And the third one is going to be the warehousing. So the bonded warehouse is providing the benefit of this 24 CCTV coverage. This is the basic fundamental requirement by the China custom. This is because all the goods that's coming to the bonded warehouse are monitored by the China customs CCTV live footage 24/7 with no dead angles. So this is a requirement because government wants to make sure that the goods that you stored in the bonded warehouse is because it's already a tax-free places. So they want to make sure that you're not doing any illegal activities over there, and they monitor them very strictly because they give you a lot of different advantages or different open access benefits that you can do in that free trade areas. And therefore, there are certain strict requirements that you have, the guidelines that you have to follow as a warehousing provider. So also bonded warehouse are also used for common cross-border e-commerce trade. So a lot of bonded warehouse are utilized for cross-border e-commerce. For example, if you have any overseas suppliers that deliver the goods to the bonded warehouse, if you're engaging any third-party platforms like Tmall, eBay, Amazon's, usually the bonded warehouse is going to be used as for the cross-border e-commerce to deliver the shipments on the parcel level to China domestically to your direct consumers. And also this fourth option is going to be the warehousing for general trade, import, export. This is one of the fundamentals for the bonded warehouse. Also, bonded warehouse are also viewed as usually an Asia hub, a global inventory to store the goods and to distribute to worldwide destinations, even APAC regions and also other regions in US, Europe, because the last point, bonded warehouse are usually located in the deep sea port. the ships are coming regular more than frequently, and it gives greater lead times from the warehouse, bonded warehouse, to distribute to overseas destinations. And the ships comes more than regular, whether it's by ocean freight, whether it's by air. It's also close to the airport locally in China, and also the bonded facilities also having the options of doing rail from China to Europe. So this is a new options that's been opened by the China government. We saw called the Silk Road, or also we call the China-Europe Railways. And also bonded facilities can give you courier shipments to do a lot of B2C e-commerce scales for your businesses. Okay, so going on to the next slide. So as I mentioned in further license requirements for a bonded warehouse, so this is a requirement by the government under a general bonded facilities. Usually under the license scope, common product commodities can be operated freely without any additional licenses. For example, like fast-moving consumer goods, electronic gadgets, special generic medical equipments, for example, like the medical devices, some of the basic medical devices can be operated without any additional license, and also toys, fashion items are also freely operated, and also within the scope that the warehouse provider are already registered. Whereas other types of commodities may or may not require additional licenses to operate within the bonded facilities. For example, if you want to operate specifically like the OTC drugs, PPE, medical products, mask, or even the facial mask, it requires specific FDA licenses. And for I mentioned earlier to Christina and to you guys, food and beverages are also require FDA licenses. Wines and alcohols are also as well, plus additional of retail license to operate. And some of the exotic products require exotic quarantine certificates. This is referring to any import exportations of any animal skin, leather, pythons, snake skins, for example, or crocodile skins, leather. So this is something that may require additional licenses to operate. Okay, so the next slide. So the bonded facilities also give the optimizations of shipping routes. So it is also viewed as a global inventory management and provide a lot of different transportation modes because it's a deep sea port. Usually the lead time of the sea, railways, air are within the greater lead times to majority of the destinations worldwide. And usually as a global inventory management within the bonded facilities, it can have a great single point of control. It's agile, it's flexible, and it's also cost optimizations because, as I mentioned earlier, the price maskings activities, some of the value activities, compare if you wanted to do in China, compare what you're going to be doing in the destination, the price will have a big differences. The cost that you're going to spend will have a huge difference. Okay, so the next slide. So the next slide is just a simple case studies that I'm going to share with you guys what we have been doing in the past. As a bonded warehouse, you can provide a lot of end-to-end supply chain services, and some of the this is the example case studies how the generic business flow from the bonded warehouse to any other destinations worldwide. You can ship to a 3PL distribution hub from the bonded warehousing, even to retailers or to any other retail outlets, or even to a B2C scale via e-commerce. And from the point of beginning, it will be consolidated from the factories, from your suppliers, or from your overseas suppliers or local suppliers in China. Those are the direction models that can be accomplished when you chose a bonded warehouse. Okay, so the next slide. So the next slide will be moving into the topic of what is a non-bonded warehouse. A non-bonded warehouse is also called a manufacturing zone. It's also called a general trade zone for import-export. It has a very similar tax definitions of the general trade zone compared to a bonded warehouse. So non-bonded warehouse, it's purely called manufacturing zones because most of the bonded warehouse are used for manufacturing activities. For example, you will manufacture could also have a non-bonded warehouse. Or even if you engage a third-party warehousing provider, a lot of their location area could also have a lot of non-bonded warehouses resist. And the area is also set up by respective entities to perform a lot of activities such as manufacturing, general trade of import-export. Locations is usually set up in major cities or county side because manufacturing activities in the China regulations are not allowed to locate it in the capital cities or in any close to city areas, are usually located in the county side because of the pollution, environmental safety, so a lot of different concerns by the local governments and regulations. And a non-bonded warehouse can be used for various purposes of trade. You can do manufacturing activities, configurations of our products from raw material to a finished goods, complex configurations, complex assemblies of a product, and even do a lot of buy-sell activities of raw material, finishing goods, and even storing the goods in the non-bonded facilities for local fulfillment purposes in China, or even for to export out to overseas destinations if required. Okay, so if we go to the next slide. So what can you do in the non-bonded warehouse? So the non-bonded warehouse gives you the functions also of import-export processing, but bear in mind, both facilities of bonded warehouse and non-bonded warehouse can do import and export processing, but the lead times are different because non-bonded warehouse are purely for manufacturing activities. If you wanted to do import and export, the lead time is usually longer because it's not located close to a deep sea port, and it's not usually located close to any other ports that it's having a great lead time advantage to distribute to overseas destinations. Usually a non-bonded warehouse are used for purposes of fulfillment domestically in China. If your customers are based in China and you wanted to fulfill it domestically, a non-bonded warehouse are usually an option to be utilized. And also, what you can do in the non-bonded warehouse, you can do complex configurations, whereas in the free trade facilities, you cannot do. Usually, free trade facilities are usually receiving a finished goods product that you can do light kitting or light value-add services for repackaging or retail packagings. And whereas for non-bonded facilities, you can do buy-sell finishing goods, even raw materials, even you can do general trade depending on your company license scope. And for the things that you cannot do in the non-bonded warehouse is the tax rebate for suppliers. So the tax rebate suppliers you cannot do in the non-bonded warehouse because the non-bonded warehouse is not residing in the free trade area. It's not a tax-free zone. It's purely a manufacturing areas that gives you the activities that allow you to do a lot of manufacturing activities. And you cannot do in the non-bonded warehouse, you can do any storing or handling any illegal products. So this is the fundamentals. And the price masking, which is the blind shipments we called. So the retail labeling cannot do in the non-bonded warehouse, as I mentioned earlier. Non-bonded warehouse is only declaring on the paperwork for manufacturing price, whether it's coming from import purposes or export purposes. Whereas if you do any retail price masking, it can only be done in the bonded facilities because it's already considered as an overseas locations. And what you cannot do in the non-bonded warehouse, some of the general trade you may not be able to do in the non-bonded warehouse. It all depends on your license scope. So if we go to the next slide, what should you look for from your warehouse provider? If you are looking to engage a warehouse provider that you wanted to utilize a non-bonded warehouse, you have to make sure that they're also geographically located. Are they close to your manufacturing suppliers? Because it could not be worthwhile if your supplier is located in South China and your warehouse provider is located further north in the North China region. Then in terms of the costing of the transportation, it's not going to be cost effective. So we have to make sure that they are located, which is close to your supplier, so the delivery lead time can cut short and make sure they deliver TAT. It can be a greater lead time on point and no further delay. Secondly is the warehousing space. Do they meet your requirements in terms of what you're looking at for a non-bonded warehouse? Do they meet in terms of space requirement? Do they have enough space to store your products from your manufacturers? And also the warehousing specifications, the same specifications from the free trade warehouse. Do they have the support for your warehousing in terms of the fundamentals equipment, facilities, automations, loading bays, racking structures, security and safety? And also the license to operate. Do they have any licenses to operate your products in terms of if you're engaging food and beverages, do they have additional license to operate for this specific product lines? Also for automotive, medicals, do they have enough or sufficient licenses to support your products? Okay, and the satellite site to support your business. Also, this is the crucial point. If you're looking for a non-bonded warehouse provider, do they have other satellite sites to support your business? If you are doing a project that is involved China fulfillment domestically, do they have other, because China is so big, do they have the routes, do they have sufficient sites to support your operations and warehouses to support you? And also some of the fundamental capabilities such as systems, do they have the warehousing systems? Can they do any integrations with what you currently have as a brand owner? Or can they do any integrations with your suppliers, with your manufacturers? And also any other successful case studies to share from their existing operations? And also the warehousing visit is always recommended if you are selecting a warehouse provider. Doesn't matter it doesn't matter if you are choosing a non-bonded warehouse or a free trade warehouse. Also, from the non-bonded warehouse perspective, you might also wanted to know if you are doing any project in relations with the China domestic fulfillment, do they have any domestic delivery capabilities? Do they have any courier partners that they work with? Do they have their own courier shipments or courier teams? Do they have any competitive rate for the land transportations? And what are the lead times the courier shipments can achieve for you, and what is your expectations that they want you to achieve in terms of the courier shipments or the local distribution deliveries? Okay, so if we go to the next slide. So the next slide is to show you the features of the non-bonded warehouse as I mentioned earlier. So the buy sell, which is the finishing goods, the raw materials involved, and also the value activities, heavy manufacture, consolidation services, even manufacturing, and also complex configurations, even serializations you can do in-house. From the non-bonded warehouse, you can also do, it's also CCTV footage coverage. Also the warehousing is also can be done for a B2B and B2C scale. The warehousing for the non-bonded warehouse can also do general import-export, but the lead time may not be greater compared to a bonded warehouse. And also, non-bonded facility is often used as a China hub to serve the local market. As I mentioned, if you do have a project that you want to engage to do China domestic fulfillment, this is going to be a great option for you to utilize. And optimizing the shipping routes, non-bonded warehouse can also do air, sea, and rail shipments. But as I mentioned, the lead time are not going to be greater than the bonded facilities because they are not usually located close to the port area or the airport areas. So usually the non-bonded warehouse are located to fulfill city-to-city fulfillment or to fulfill on the courier shipments, domestic fulfillment purposes. And if we go to the next slide, license requirements, we have to understand some of the license requirement for a non-bonded warehouse. You have to make sure some of the common product commodities can also be operated freely as a non-bonded warehouse. Just have to make sure if you are engaging with them under a specific product lines that you want them to handle for you, you have to make sure that they are registered, additional licenses to operate, they are qualified to operate your products, and whether it's on the warehousing standpoint, whether it's on the logistics fulfillment standpoint, they all have to be qualified before you make the final decisions. Okay, so the next slide. So next slide is just an example of what we have been done in the past for a non-bonded warehouse as a network provide for the national coverage. So this is a great example for you guys to understand what are the capabilities for a non-bonded warehouse can do. It has a great, we call it the China hub to fulfill your domestic deliveries. It has a greater lead time to deliver from city to city to other majority of the cities, countryside in China, and it has a greater TIT lead time because if you select a warehousing partner, you have to make sure they have a strong partnership with the couriers, and also they can handle the courier shipments, whether it's a system integration scale or whether it's the physical fulfillment status or fulfillment capabilities they can do. So that's why this case study is just to show you an example of the domestic distribution network and how it's been covered. Okay, so if we go to the next slide, so this is a great, I would say this is a great example for you guys to better understand the utilizations of a bonded versus a non-bonded facilities. So as I mentioned earlier, in the bonded facilities, can I do kitting and assembly? Yes, but they are limited to light kitting assembly without changing original HS code. Whereas in the non-bonded facilities, because it's viewed as a manufacturing facilities, certainly you can do complex kitting, assembly, even changing the HS code from one to another. And for the importation to China, for bonded facilities, you can do importation, but it requires the China VATs and duty to be paid in advance. And for the non-bonded facilities, there's no importation required because the non-bonded facilities are already residing in the domestic China areas. So there's no importation criteria. And in terms of the tax rebate, so if you some of you may wonder, oh, tax rebate is very important for my suppliers, and I really need them to get a tax rebate. So this is when you need to consider a bonded facilities, because the bonded facilities, they can get the tax rebates, whereas compared to if you utilize a non-bonded facilities, your suppliers can only get the tax rebate when the goods are physically shipped out from China. So the lead time, for example, if you are doing an ocean freight shipment, you can also view the lead time compared to the bonded facilities. Compared to I can get a tax rebate in 1 day, whereas I can get a tax rebate if I ship out from a non-bonded facility, I have to get it after 30 days. Because if I go by ocean freight, it'll usually be a 30 days, or if I go by air freight, it's usually be 3 days or 4 days later on. So the lead times are different. There's a gap. And from the mainland China distribution lead time, so bonded facilities are required VAT and duty to be clear in advance in order to deliver locally. So this is usually used for a B2C e-commerce scale. So if you want to distribute to mainland China from the bonded facilities, you make sure you have to clear all the VATs and duties before you deliver locally. And this is in a scenario if all your suppliers are residing overseas. And whereas if your suppliers are all located in the China mainland, you can deliver to the non-bonded facilities ASAP because the China distributions has a greater lead time from the non-bonded facilities. And from the overseas distribution lead time, as I mentioned, in comparison, bonded facilities has a lot of different transportation modes that you can choose, and it has a greater lead time to majority of the worldwide destinations because it's closer to the port. Whereas among non-bonded facilities, it usually have a longer lead time because it's not close to the port areas, and you have to have, and there's additional transportation cost and also additional transportation lead time that's delivered to from your warehouse, non-bonded warehouse to the port. And the blind ship, which is non-bonded facilities can provide the blind ship, which I mentioned, is to avoid any confidential information from the manufacturer because non-bonded facilities is already considered as an overseas entity. So you can view non-bonded facilities as like a warehouse in Singapore, like a warehouse in Japan or US. You can already do a lot of declaration paperwork, not under the supplier's information. So many of you, if you have, we had a case studies where we deliver in the past to a lot of retailers worldwide using bonded facilities. This is a good benefit where to utilize them because they can do all the customs paperwork under the bonded facilities as a service provider's name and entity. So they don't have to use your supplier's information to do the exportation paperwork. So which they can hide all the confidential information to leak in order not to leak out to any of your consignee or any of your end customers, whether it's a retail hub or any is a third-party hub. And for the non-bonded facilities, if you export out, the end customer will likely to see the confidential information of manufacturer. This is due to the declaration paperwork can only show manufacturing information because it's a direct export. Because non-bonded facilities, when they receive the goods, it is purely from the manufacturer in advance, and when they want to export out, they can only use the manufacturer information to do any export. And also, so from the return service standpoint, the bonded facility cannot process returns. This is because it's a bonded product and the manufacturer already received the tax rebate. This is the benefit that the China customs and local governments giving your suppliers as a benefit when you're residing within the bonded facilities. Therefore, the return services is not allowed in the bonded facilities unless you are willing to pay back the importation and duty debt so that they can allow you to do the return. Whereas in the non-bonded facilities, you can do any return as you want because it's not within a tax-free zone. Usually the goods are already from the manufacturers and you can do a return services if you want, or we call it the call centers. Usually if you are engaging any businesses on the B2B or B2C scales, the non-bonded facilities are usually often used as a domestic fulfillment hub or as a call return services for any rework or any reconfiguration needs to be done in-house. Yep. Okay, so this is everything that I have explained, the comparisons and the informations from the non-bonded facilities and the bonded facilities. And now I'm going to hand over to Christina and let her to start with any Q&As from you guys.
Perfect, Alan. Perfect, Alan. Thank you so much. So I know some people have been dropping off because we've run out of the 60-minute time frame. But let's go through all the questions that have been highlighted, and then I've got a few more at the end if there's time left as well. So maybe this next question is for me. Jihong was writing, if we have obtained the trademark of our product name in English in China and applying to register the trademark of our company's logo and product name in Chinese, however, we didn't apply to register our company's name. What is the risk to export to the Chinese market? Do we have to apply to register all the above with the Chinese Customs Bureau? Jihong, you basically how to analyze that is to understand what name is on the product and what name is on the packaging. And that is what should be registered at the trademark office, and that is what should be registered at customs. Your company name is only on the shipping documentation, unless you're putting the company name also on the packaging and on the product itself. So whatever you're putting on the documentation doesn't have to be registered as a trademark or as a trademark with the Customs Bureau. I hope that answers your question, Jihong. Martin was asking, if you import smaller volumes, such as specialty prescription medications, they would be flown in. Are there any bonded facilities near airports, or are they for high volume consumables that are shipped into China only? Alan?
Sorry, Christina, can you repeat the question again? Because I think the connection has a little bit dropped.
Sure. If you import smaller volumes, such as specialty prescription medications, they would be flown in. Are there any bonded facilities near airports, or are they for high volume consumables that are shipped into China only?
So there are many bonded facilities near the airport, including near the seaport as well. So it depending on what kind of bonded facility services that you wanted to engage within. As I mentioned earlier, you have to make sure that if you select a bonded facility provider, you have to make sure that they have the capability to handle, for example, your product, the prescriptions, medicines. You have to make sure that they have the capability to handle your products. So there are many bonded facilities near the airport, indeed.
And would it be okay? So Martin's question is also surrounded around, is it okay to import smaller volumes?
Yes, of course. You can enter any kind of volume from the bonded facilities.
Okay. Kim has a relatively long question. Let me go through it. I have a need to pick pack from a number of products coming from different suppliers, shipping from different cities. As you know, each factory in an area has a separate customs export exit. Let's say I want to pick and pack products from suppliers across Guangdong, Zhejiang, and Fujian. Can a bonded warehouse in, say, Ningbo receive goods that are deemed for export from a factory that usually ships from Dongguan Customs and allow each of the supplier to get their export rebate or fulfill their customs contract? That was a mouthful.
Of course.
I hope
Yep,
you got all of that,
yeah.
Alan.
So the answer is yes, of course. This is, as I mentioned in my earlier slide, a bonded facilities, it's established for the need of consolidations. So the consolidation can mean a consolidation for your goods from your multiple suppliers residing in China, or even multiple supplier residing from overseas. So if you have, for example, if you have an order that you wanted to deliver to APAC region, you can also use the bonded facilities if you have your overseas suppliers to deliver to the bonded facilities, and then consolidate and distribute to your APAC region customers. And vice versa, if you have your suppliers residing in all the major mainland China in different cities, then you can also utilize the bonded facilities to do a consolidation work to consolidate the goods and also consolidate your customs paperwork. Also, individually, your manufacturer can also get the tax rebate accordingly.
Fantastic. Okay, the next question is also from Kim. Does a bonded warehouse only use the employees who work for that warehouse, or can my company set up my own people to work there?
This is subject to usually subject to the negotiation between your company and the service provider that you want to engage. So
no, I think Alan, I think Kim is asking in a different way. I think ultimately he's asking, can I rent my own warehouse and have my own people in the bonded zone?
Yes, you do, but you have to register an established company, an entity in China, and also you have to register as whether if you're doing a bonded facility, is usually a service provider. So you have to make sure that your company licenses are under the trading license scope.
Right. Kim, I think that was the direction you were going in. If it's not, just message down below and we can re-attack that. All right, Ken was asking, can bonded warehouses handle e-commerce B2C product returns? And I think the previous slide highlighted that it can. No, it cannot.
Yep.
Only so, unbonded warehouse, right?
Yeah. So what we dealt with in the past, usually the bonded facilities, of course, it cannot do any return because it's already a tax-free zone. If you wanted to do any return, you have to pay back the VAT and duties. Whereas from the e-commerce perspective, the e-commerce business flow is utilizing a bonded warehouse to do domestic fulfillment. Whereas if it comes to return, it will be returned to appointed domestic facilities that you partner with your warehousing providers. So the e-commerce business model is a little bit different because the e-commerce business model, it has to utilize both warehouses for non-bonded and bonded warehouse. One for call return, one for the call return center, and one for the domestic fulfillment from the bonded facility.
All right, let's move on. Antoza is asking, the FDA license, would this be required from the UK or another license from the UK? Antoza, I'm not really sure what you're trying to get at there. The FDA license is required by the warehouse provider in order to be able to manage the goods in China. I think Alan and I were not clear on what is required from a UK perspective because today's focus is looking at what's required from China when you're on the ground in China, when the goods are on the ground in China. So the warehouse provider in China has to have an FDA license to operate and handle the food and beverage items or the medical drug items. If you want to clarify your question, just put that also again below. Leon was asking, and I think Leon, I missed this question from you yesterday, apologies. Alan, Leon is asking, basically, when you compare a e-commerce model, a cross-border e-commerce model to a traditional sales model, are the duty rates and customs rates, do they differ?
Yes, indeed. So under a general trade, the duty import duty rates are different. For example, a bottle of canteen under a general trade, the HS code, you may have to pay 8% up to 10%. Whereas if you're operating under an e-commerce warehouse, which is in the bonded facilities, the HS code and the duty rate that you needed to pay is going to be under a 6%, for example, or 5%. Because the reason the rate are different is because governments are trying to promote for the consumer to give them the benefit of the purchase from online and from the overseas products, and to give them the benefit of the paying the tax lesser compared to a normal B2B business tradings.
Alan, is it fair to say, because nobody's asked this, but I think people need to have this understanding, is it fair to say that when you're developing an e-commerce model, the only solution you have is to go through a bonded warehousing solution?
So the e-commerce models has two types of models. So e-commerce models can utilize a bonded facilities is only subject to if your suppliers are all residing overseas.
Okay.
So if
you're doing cross-border, so if it's cross-border e-commerce, suppliers overseas, you're going to use a bonded warehouse to bring the goods in.
And if most of your suppliers are residing in the mainland China and you wanted to go on the e-commerce options, then you can also utilize a non-bonded warehouse depending on your customer, what you so-called the market segment. Depending on your customer, if all your customers are residing in China, then you may want to utilize a non-bonded warehouse for cross-border e-commerce warehouse to do the domestic fulfillment.
So let's sum that up then. So for e-commerce, if all the suppliers are overseas and they want to do cross-border e-commerce, they're going to use a bonded warehouse. If you are producing in China, you want to go on an e-commerce market, and your customers that are purchasing from those e-commerce platforms are in China, you would go ahead and use a non-bonded warehouse.
That's correct.
Okay. I hope that's summed up for everybody. It gives everybody a bit of a clearer picture on how the e-commerce side is working from that regard. Then there's Robin, who unfortunately has left, but let's answer his question anyway. He says, a brilliant presentation, thank you. From your experience, is there a minimum value of shipments or annual sales below which use of a bonded warehouse is not justified? I think, Robin, that's not the perspective you should take, because it depends on what is your trade flow. If it is from overseas, is it local? Are you manufacturing? Are you doing e-commerce? I don't know, Alan, do you have a point of view on that?
From my past operation experience, there is no such thing as minimum value that needs to be handled. You can actually operate any kind of value and volumes that you want to handle in the bonded facilities. So far, there's no restriction on that.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, then we've got a question from Raffaella. So Raffaella produces in Italy. She's a fashion accessory producer, and she wants to start e-commerce. What do you suggest, bonded or non-bonded? I think, Raffaella, the conclusion is if you're producing in Italy, it's going to be bonded if you want to do cross-border e-commerce.
Yeah, I would recommend to do cross-border e-commerce within the bonded facilities, because I would presume your target customers are going to be in China market. And having said that, then it will be will be better to utilize the bonded facilities, because majority of your suppliers are in Italy, and when they deliver the shipment to the bonded facilities, it's still tax-free, and you can also deliver to your end customers in China per declaration basis, depending on how many volumes that you wanted to declare and ship it to the domestic market, to your consumer. So having said that, you don't have to pay a large importation fee when you wanted to deliver it to your customer. You can deliver using the cross-border e-commerce route, deliver per parcel basis.
All
Yep,
right,
I hope
let's
that
move on. Raphael says okay.
Yep, okay.
Then Joachim is asking, do I need a Chinese company with a license to have products as a consignment stock in a bonded warehouse? I think, Joachim, are you asking, do you have to have a company, or could you outsource everything for consignment business? Is that what you're asking? So do I need a Chinese company to have products as a consignment stock in a bonded warehouse? You don't have to have a company. I mean,
No, you
nobody's
don't have
forcing you
to.
to have a company. You can bring goods
can
in through your
outsource,
freight you can use a freight forwarder, you can use a freight forwarder, you can use a logistics firm. Everything is outsourced to them, it's stocked with them, and then it's sold on consignment to your customers within China. So you don't have to have an entity in China to sell into China, unless your customers in China are requesting to receive fapiaos, which are Chinese invoices from you, which at that point you would either have to use an agent, a trading agent, or have your own entity to issue those fapiaos. But from a logistical point of view, you don't have to set up your own entity. So Jihong had a follow-up question. What is the best shipping option from bonded warehouse to end customer? How to operate that from overseas? Depends where your client is, Jihong. I mean, as Alan highlighted, you can use rail, truck. I think it depends. Alan, do you want to add your 2 cents on that?
So, Christina, do you mention like the transportation modes within the bonded facilities, the utilizations?
Well, she's just saying, what is the best shipping option from bonded warehouse to end customer?
So it depends on where your end customers is. If your end customers is in China, then of course it's going to be a land transportations and importations. But if your end customers are residing worldwide, a bonded facility can go either by rail, China to Europe rail, or even by ocean freight to worldwide and air freight, depending on what are the lead time that you're looking for and the negotiating between what is the TAT that you required and your expectations in terms of using different transportation mode. But as a bonded facilities, those transportation modes are 100% matured nowadays. Yeah.
Okay, then Martin's asking, can products that we have imported into a bonded warehouse be returned to us in Europe if there are any issues, i.e. they never leave the bonded warehouse?
Yes, of course. So bear in mind any overseas shipment that's going to a China bonded warehouse, it's not considered as importation. It's just considered as free port to free port, just like you ship a product from US to Singapore, US to Japan, because China bonded warehouse is considered as a free port. So you don't have to pay any taxations when you ship any product from overseas to China bonded facilities. Only when if you wanted to do any importation from the bonded facilities in China to China domestic market. Yeah, and of course the return is available. So if you ship a product to the bonded facilities, if it happens any issues, you wanted to do a return, of course you can do a return.
All right, so then Ken is asking, do you have a website for the latest whitelist of products for e-commerce and bonded warehouse? Can you look that up on the Chinese customs site, Alan?
Yes, of course. The China government, the customs site has the English version for all the whitelist that it's been operating under the cross-border e-commerce scale.
Great. Kim is asking, how long is the government administrative process to set up a company to get going in a bonded warehouse? Kim, to set up a company in China without getting any additional licenses would take about 3 to 4 months. But as Alan highlighted, you're going to have to get more licenses based on the products that you're going to be handling within that warehouse. So that just adds on to the time, but the minimum would be 3 to 4
Yeah.
months.
It could be 3 to 4 months or longer if you wanted to set up by your own. Usually, from my past experience, we would rather to do outsourcing for an established service provider that already have all the capabilities and requirements per your request. So
Right.
it depends. If you have the time and if you have the investments that you wanted to do on your own, feel free to go forward and register the company and entity in China, and then set up a whole warehouse facilities in the bonded area. And of course, it will take time, but you need to evaluate comparing to what is your lead time that you're looking at, and what is your target timeline that you wanted to accomplish. If you want to complete in a very short lead time, then of course the whole setup would not be the requirement that you're looking for. It will
So
rather be an
generally,
outsource.
right, I think, Kim, there's also another aspect you have to think about. So most people set up their entities in the free trade zone, their trading entities in the free trade zone, to give them control over the trading transactions. But they outsource the freight forwarding, the domestic transportation, and the warehousing to providers that are also in the free trade zone or in the bonded areas. So one thing you've got to look at is, what is your aim? To handle transactions yourself, or to handle the physical warehousing yourself, right? That's more of a strategy session, if you'd like to look into that. Rafaela was asking, the final customers are private individuals in China. How much duty will be paid? How much duty will be paid, and who pays that duty? So Rafaela, the duty depends on the product. Each has an HS code, and then based on that HS code, you'll find out the customs duty rate. I'm going to leave it up to Alan to say who pays what.
Oh, so Christina, can you repeat in the first sentences which
Sure.
when it
The
comes to
final,
the delivery? Yeah.
so the final customer is an individual in China. Who pays the duty when they receive the goods? Is it Rafaela in Italy, or is it the customer in China, the individual in China?
So it depends on the business model that you engage with your end customers. If your end customers is operating as a general trade on a B2B level, then usually the importation tax and VAT duties are paid by the consignee, which is your end customers. Whereas, and also it depends on the freight shipments that you handle for them and the terms and negotiation. If you're handling a door-to-door shipment for your end customers, then of course the import duties and all the related costs will be bared by yourself, by the brand owners. But if you're operating, but if your term is, for example, other terms that I only handled the shipments from origin to the port, and everything's leave it to you, then of course the consignee will have to take care of the importation. But under the B2C scale, if it's under the cross-border e-commerce, usually the end customers whoever purchase anything online will need to pay the import duties. And usually the import duty rate will be lesser than the general trade of a B2B.
So that's all the questions that have come in. Alan, I've got one final question, because we had a couple of people yesterday ask about Hong Kong and whether Hong Kong makes any difference. So you mentioned that one of the benefits of using a bonded zone for warehousing is the fact that you can use it as an Asian hub. So I think just from a price comparison standpoint, when you're talking about warehousing and logistical things, and you compare, let's just compare Shanghai and Hong Kong, what would actually be more cost effective to make as your Asian hub?
So there are certain criteria that you need to consider. So for example, Hong Kong is also a free port. Nowadays, China government wants to open up access for any other cities, not just Shanghai, including Shenzhen, Beijing capital. They want to open as a free port like Hong Kong. So now it's all 100% mature and already established. So I could say that Shanghai has the same setup, the same facility, just like Hong Kong, just like Singapore. So it depends on what is your project fulfillment, and what is your end customer and your market segment based. If your customers are mostly in mainland China, then of course you need to consider the cost and the lead time. If you set up a warehouse in Hong Kong, utilizing a bonded facility in Hong Kong, the delivery lead time from Hong Kong to mainland China, different cities will have a different lead time gap. And also the cost may be higher comparing to if you're utilizing already a Shanghai bonded facilities, which is closer to any other cities in China, then the lead time, the cost, and the warehousing lead time will be, maybe greater. And comparing, if you wanted to distribute overseas, you may want to consider what is the warehouse capability between Hong Kong and Shanghai. I know they all have the fundamental capabilities, but you might want to look into details. What are the things that Hong Kong can do, and what are the things that Shanghai cannot do and can do? And if are there any gaps in between, or are there any different facility requirements by the China Customs that are differently? They may have different benefits, which you may have to ask. Whereas from your warehousing provider that you target, you may want to ask them from Hong Kong, what are the regulations that you have? What can you do? What you cannot do? Compared to in Shanghai, you may want to do a comparison before you made the final decisions. So it's actually, I could say it's varied depending on your strategy and depending on your market segment that you targeted, then the utilization will be different. But likewise, the warehousing options are pretty much the same.
All right, perfect. I think we're gonna end it there. Alan, thank you so much for joining. I just wanted to say, if people want to set up a meeting with chat or email with me, I'm going to add those things in the chat box. Alan, if in the chat box you want to add your WeChat ID so some of the attendees can also connect with you, that might be really beneficial.
Sure.
Because then you can also set up meetings with Alan via WeChat. That was our last session today. Woodburn's next webinar is going to be on developing your China roadmap method, which is all about strategy development and bullet points that you have to think about in terms of creating this fluid and smooth organization in the Chinese market. If you do want to register, again, you'll get the link from the slides later on. I want to thank people that have attended all 4 days. That's absolutely amazing. I appreciate that. Alan, thank you so much for attending yesterday and today, especially that it's public holiday. So I just want to highlight Happy Dragon Boat Festival to everybody.
Yeah.
I had a lot of fun this week. I hope people had a lot of fun this week. And again, don't hesitate. If you've got questions, just reach out to Alan or myself, and we'd be happy to answer them. I wish you all a great long weekend, and thank you very much. Take care and goodbye.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you, everyone. Have a good day.